In 5 years, one of these giant Brazilian retail companies will no longer exist. You will understand how the curse of Brazilian retail works and why this curse has a high potential to destroy even very well-established billion-dollar companies. But wait, I promise to offer strong arguments to make this statement more believable.
What happens in Brazil mainly is the following. The retail sector is a crippled sector. It doesn't have a reliable connotation in its operations.
The billion-dollar deficit at Lojas Americanas. The situation is even more complicated for the company.
Marisa store chain is in a financial crisis. Closing stores across Brazil has been one initiative to address this situation.
Have you ever stopped to think about how much personal data you share online every day? Despite the benefits that internet access has brought in the digital age we live in, our data is increasingly exposed to malicious people who are willing to steal our private information, such as your email login and even your bank account details. Brazilian retail moves about 1.5 trillion reais, which attracts international operators, investments in companies, and demand for retail company stocks. Envisioning the growth potential and long-term prospects. Brazil has 5,570 municipalities, but the 40 largest account for 40% of the consumption potential. 89 municipalities generate 50% of national consumption, and 366 reach 70%. On the other extreme, there are 2,462 municipalities that account for only 10% of consumption. Class A makes up about 20% of consumption, Class B 26%, and Class C 50%. Like any country, the Brazilian market has its own particularities. Walmart is the world's largest retailer but has failed to establish itself in some countries, including ours. This alone already shows that this business model can be unstable. Even the biggest company in this sector struggles to establish itself in some markets. Walmart reigns in the United States, but that doesn't guarantee their model will work everywhere in the world. Retail is a business that is sustained by countless variables. Some are controllable, like the quality of customer service, but others are not. And those that are not controllable are one of the main risk factors of this business model. If you want to know more details about Walmart's failure in Brazil, I'll leave a card up here to make it easier for you to watch later. But the Walmart example is just one that demonstrates what is known as the retail curse. It's not hard to find news about major Brazilian retailers going from bad to worse these days.
Magalu has fallen over 76% this year. Kaique, what do we do now?
Oh my god!
Open the fridge to help.
Magazine Luiza, which in 2015 had its stock priced at 3 cents, reached its peak at the end of 2020, costing an incredible 27 reais and 33 cents, an astronomical appreciation of more than 90,000%, which would turn a modest 100 reais into more than 90,000 reais. Magalu's shares have fallen 85% from their 2020 peak of 27 reais to about 3 reais and 60 cents, for reasons we'll see further ahead. Another retail giant that's facing a complicated bankruptcy recovery is Americanas, after it broke in the media that it had a 43 billion reais hole in debts that were incorrectly recorded. Ricardo Eletro, known for its loud television ads, surprisingly had bankruptcy declared 3 times just last year. These are just a few examples, but let's take one in particular which is also in crisis and possibly on the verge of bankruptcy. Lojas Marisa. Lojas Marisa is a Brazilian women's fashion chain, well known for its slogan, "From woman to woman." Despite the fact that the company has always had very few women in leadership positions throughout its history. After decades of expansion, Marisa became one of those classic stores you expect to find inside a shopping mall. It still operates today with other retailers like Renner, C&A, and Riachuelo, all of which have been in the market for at least 50 years. Owner of the first women's fashion e-commerce in Brazil back in 1999, Marisa also has a network of about 400 stores spread throughout the country. More recently, it has been going through a serious crisis and has already announced the closure of 91 stores by June of this year. The company is highly in debt and some of its creditors have already gone to court requesting its bankruptcy. Some have requested evicting certain stores for not paying rent. But these difficulties are not new. Retail is a sector that has always gone through turbulence. Anyone who lived through the 70s, 80s, or 90s will probably remember names like Mesbla, Mapin, Ultralar, Arapuan, and Jumbo Electro. All of them had dozens of stores spread throughout Brazil, which ended up disappearing from the map. The economic situation in the 90s was tough for everyone, especially these companies. The country faced a series of difficulties, and hyperinflation was a hard blow to the retail sector at the time. This economic instability also made access to credit more difficult, which is an instrument that's practically vital for retail. And today, the lack of access to this instrument is exactly what's leaving retailers like Marissa to fend for themselves. Besides the pandemic, the loss of trust caused by the Americanas case made banks inevitably become more strict.
The entire retail sector after January started to have a huge problem on its hands, because January was when the big problem with Americanas was discovered and exposed. The banks did the following. Whoa, I'm going to stop lending money to retailers.
They won't lend money to just any company, and when they do, the interest rates aren't very friendly. Retail doesn't forgive. Some that were big in the past have died, and those that are big now also run that risk. Why does this happen so harshly in this sector? Retail is the final link between manufacturer and customer. Since it's a business with not very high entry barriers, this ends up making the sector very competitive. As a result, profit margins will be greatly affected. Basically, a price war will occur unless you are a luxury retailer like Lacoste and other brands of that kind. But, taking Magazine Luiza as an example, at its peak in 2019 it had a net margin of 4.64%. This means for every 100 reais sold after all costs and taxes, it keeps 4 reais and 64 cents. But this net margin was only at its peak. In some years this was around 2%, in others even negative. In other words, the company had a loss. If we look at other big companies in Brazilian retail, we'll see that it's no different. Via Varejo and Americanas have net margins near or below zero. To further illustrate how retail is a fiercely competitive sector, let's go back to the case of Walmart. It's been the company with the highest revenue in the world for several consecutive years. In 2022, they earned $611 billion in revenue. For reference, Apple ranks 7th with $385 billion in revenue. But when we change the ranking based on profit, Apple jumps to second place with an average net margin of 20%, ranking among other technology companies like Microsoft and oil refineries. Walmart drops way down, going to the 49th position. Companies position themselves in the market with various, sometimes unique strategies. Brand value, product quality, customer service, exclusivity, and accessibility always differ by brand. This competitive scenario became even tighter in Brazil with the arrival of Shopee, Amazon, and even companies like AliExpress and Shein. João Pinheiro Nogueira Batista, a business restructuring specialist who took over the management of Lojas Marissa last month, said in an interview with Estadão that competition with international retailers such as Shein has harmed the company. João also argued, quote, "If the economy were better and without all this smuggling, maybe I wouldn't have to close 90 stores." End quote. The overwhelming competition that some marketplaces represent for Brazilian retail is yet another ingredient in the retail curse. Shopee entered Brazil in 2019, years after Amazon, which arrived in 2012. But even so, it went ahead and overtook competing marketplaces with aggressive strategies. Currently, it's only behind Mercado Livre, which has 14% market share. Shopee has strategies to boost its sales, including coupons, promotional dates, points, and even an installment program. It created something very similar to the payment booklets from Casas Bahia, for example. Personalized customer service may not be crucial during our country's current situation. After all, the wholesale retailers are showing good performance even without being able to offer customers a differentiated shopping experience. Marketplaces like Shopee, similar to wholesale retailers, speak the language customers want: price. Even so, competition and tight profit margins are some of the inherent and to some extent controllable risks of retail. However, there are also the uncontrollable ones, which are capable of destroying large companies in this sector here in Brazil. Retail is a sector that is very sensitive to macroeconomic variables. The dollar and inflation are two things that the central bank tries to keep stable at all costs. What is happening in Argentina now? Having to create a 2,000 peso bill equivalent to $4 as a measure to try to ease the drama of inflation of more than 100% was already a nightmare that our country lived through in the 80s and 90s.
Because the government deceives you and deceives everyone, right? They tell you that inflation is 8% when it's actually 40. Do you understand? Then what? In retail, you buy a product for R1 and say, well, I'm going to sell this product in 10 installments, making 100% profit. Is that right? So are you going to sell it for 2? What happens during the course of inflation? It erodes in a vengeful way, I would even say. So, when you get halfway through what you were going to receive as 2 reais at the end of the line, you already have to buy that product for 2 reais. So, retail is an activity where you always have to be systematically putting in resources.
Inflation is usually a predictable phenomenon, and it's one of the ingredients of the retail curse. In recent years, we've felt this phenomenon not only in Brazil but also on a global scale. Everything became more expensive and the currency got weaker. As a result, our money started to buy fewer products and services. One of the main ways to control inflation, according to the central bank itself, is by raising the basic interest rate, the well-known Selic. The Selic rate indicates how much the government pays in interest to financial institutions that buy government bonds from the national treasury. But the Selic rate influences all interest rates in the country, including loans and financing both for individuals and companies. In practice, a higher Selic rate leads to less economic activity. In other words, people buy less and companies earn and invest less. All this situation results in a population focused on buying only the basics: food, health, and hygiene. It's unsurprising that hypermarkets and pharmacy chains are less affected by this macroeconomic variable, because these are things people will never stop buying. However, clothing retailers and other segments considered not so essential, such as Marisa stores, suffered terribly. High interest rates and inflation make this scenario very unfavorable.
One of the reasons is that when you look at how much Brazilians' income has decreased, there has been a decline in the average Brazilian income. And since Magalu's main customers are usually from classes B, C, and D, which are financially less privileged, these classes were more affected. So you have very high unemployment, you have a decrease in income, and this mainly affects the poorer classes. So the company suffers a bit more.
If the company doesn't have good working capital to withstand the pressure of very high fixed costs, like rent and suppliers, the path will inevitably be frequent losses, which can lead to possible judicial recovery or even bankruptcy. That's why retailers that aren't well adapted to the marketplace or other forms of revenue, in scenarios where the country's economy is bad, can end up in a dead end. The past shows us that many were not able to survive these macroeconomic variables of inflation, the dollar, and interest rates. I'm not a prophet, much less Luis Barsi. Given the historical context and retail business model, it's not radical to say some major retailers today may not exist in the future.
Retail companies, at least about 40 of them have gone bankrupt, and the next ones will go bankrupt too. All right? Magazine Luisa will go bankrupt one day. I don't know when, but it will go bankrupt. Do you understand? I'm not a prophet. I'm speaking in terms of history.
The purchasing power of the population has decreased, and according to data from Serasa, 71.44 million Brazilians are in default. Retailers need to be creative to bring shoppers back, with many investing in loyalty programs, price promotions, and improvements to the online customer experience. And the famous cashback. Magalu still has an even bolder bet for this scenario. And slowly, it is ceasing to be a retail company per se to become a technology company. For the first time, marketplace sales managed to surpass sales in physical stores. In 2023, third-party inventory sales rose by 19%. This marketplaceification movement is not exclusive to her, and maybe it's a convenient way for some traditional retailers to reinvent themselves for the era of Industry 4.0. Whether it's the past or the future, retail is a wild segment where even the strongest will die. However, the one who adapts best may prevail. The connection between industry and the end customer is usually unstable, and the death of giant brands, which makes room for new ones, is as natural as the passing of the 4 seasons of the year. Diving even deeper into history, we can remember brands like Kodak, Varig, and Oi, which, for one reason or another, have ended up existing practically only in memory nowadays. This effect, called the retail curse in the end, is just another quirk of this business model that finds its own beauty and opportunities in chaos. But what about you? Do you agree or disagree with all of this? Share your thoughts in the comments.